الله الرحمن الرحيم. السلام عليك يا أبا عبد الله، السلام عليك يا ابن رسول الله، السلام عليك يا خيرة الله وابن خيرته، السلام عليك يا ابن أمير المؤمنين وابن سيد الوسيم، السلام عليك يا ابن فاطمة سيدة نساء العالمين، السلام عليك يا ثار الله وابن ثاره والوتر الموتور، السلام عليك وعلى الأرواح التي حلت بفنائك، عليكم مني جميعا سلام. لعن الله أمة دفعتكم عن مقامكم وأزلتكم عن مراتبكم التي رتبكم الله فيها، ولعن الله أمة قتلتكم، ولعن الله ممهدين لهم بالتمكين من قتالكم. برئت إلى الله وإليكم منهم ومن أشياعهم وأتباعهم وأوليائهم. يا أبا عبد الله، إني سلم لمن سالمكم وحرب لمن حاربكم إلى يوم القيامة. ولعن الله على زياد وعلى مروان، ولعن الله بني أمية قاطبة، ولعن الله ابن مرجان، ولعن الله عمر بن سعد، ولعن الله شمران، ولعن الله أمة أسرجت والجمات وتنقبت لقتالك. بأبي أنت وأمي لقد عظم مصابي بك، فاسأل الله الذي أكرم مقامك وأكرمني بك أن يرزقني طلب ثارك مع إمام منصور من أهل بيت محمد صلى الله عليه وآله. اللهم اجعلني عندك وجيها بالحسين عليه السلام في الدنيا والآخرة. يا أبا عبد الله، إني أتقرب إلى الله وإلى رسوله وإلى أمير المؤمنين وإلى فاطمة وإلى الحسن وإليك بموالاتك وبالبراءة ممن قتلك ونسبا لك الحرب، وبالبراءة ممن أسس أساس ظلم والجور عليكم، وأبرأ إلى الله وإلى رسوله ممن أسس أساس ذلك وبنى عليه بنيانا وجرى في ظلمه وجوره عليكم وعلى أشيائكم. برئت إلى الله وإليكم منهم وتقربوا إلى الله ثم إليكم بموالاتكم وموالاة وليكم وبالبراءة من أعدائكم وناصبين لكم الحرب وبالبراءة من أشياعهم وأتباعهم. إني سلم لمن سالمكم وحرب لمن حاربكم وولي لمن والاكم وعدو لمن عاداكم. فاسأل الله الذي أكرمني بمعرفتكم ومعرفة أوليائكم ورزقني البراءة من أعدائكم أن يجعلني معكم في الدنيا والآخرة ويثبت لي عندكم قدم صدق في الدنيا والآخرة، وأسأله أن يبلغني المقام المحمود لكم عند الله ويرزقني طلب ثاري مع إمام هدى ظاهر ناطق بالحق منكم. وأسأل الله بحقكم وبالشأن الذي لكم عنده أن يعطيني بمصاب بكم أفضل ما يعطي مصابا بمصيبته، مصيبة معظمها وأعظم رزية بالإسلام وفي جميع السماوات والأرض. اللهم اجعلني في مقامي هذا ممن تناله منك صلوات ورحمة ومغفرة. اللهم اجعل محياي محيا محمد وآل محمد، ومماتي ممات محمد وآل محمد. إن هذا يوم تبركت به إن هذا يوم تبركت به ابن أمية وابن آكلة الأكباد اللعين ابن اللعين على لسانك ولسان نبيك صلى الله عليه وآله في كل موطن وموقف، وكفى في نبيك صلى الله عليه وآله. اللهم لعن أبا سفيان ومعاوية ويزيد بن معاوية، عليهم منك لعنة أبد العابدين. وهذا يوم فرحت به آل زياد وآل مروان بقتلهم الحسين صلوات الله عليه. اللهم فضاعف عليهم اللعنة منك والعذاب العليم. اللهم إني أتقرب إليك في هذا اليوم وفي موقفي هذا وأيام يأتي بالبراءة منهم ولعنة عليهم وبالموالاة لنبيك وآل نبيك عليه وآلهم السلام. اللهم لعن أول ظالم ظلم حق محمد وآل محمد وآخر تاب له على ذلك. اللهم لعن إصابة التي جاهدت الحسين وشايعت وبايعت وتابعت على قتله. اللهم لعنهم جميعا. السلام عليك يا أبا عبد الله وعلى الأرواح التي حلت بفدائك. عليك مني سلام الله أبدا ما بقيت وبقي الليل والنهار، ولا جعل الله آخر لحظي مني لزيارتكم جميعا. السلام على الحسين وعلى علي بن الحسين وعلى أولاد الحسين وعلى أصحاب الحسين. اللهم خص أنت أول ظالم باللعن مني وابدأ به أولا، ثم لعن ثانيا وثالثا ورابع. اللهم لعن يزيد خامسا، ولعن عبيد الله بن زياد وابن مرجان وعمر بن سعد وشمعان وعلى أبي سفيان وعلى زياد وعلى مروان إلى يوم القيامة. اللهم لك الحمد حمد الشاكرين لك على مصابهم. الحمد لله على عظيم رزيته. اللهم ارزقني شفاعة الحسين يوم الورود، وثبت لقدم صدق عندك مع الحسين وأصحاب الحسين الذين بذلوا محجهم دون الحسين عليه السلام. صلوا على محمد وآل محمد. صل على محمد وآل محمد. عاجبي زينب كياتي صدا بھائی حسین آج بھی زینب کی آتی تیرا چہرہ تیری آنکھیں بھول کب پائی حسین آج بھی زینب کی آتی ہے صدا بھائی حسین چلتے نا کیسے گرایا خود کو جلتی ریت پر چلتے نا کیسے گرایا خود کو جلتی ریت پر گٹھلیوں کے بل میں تیری لاش تک آئی حسین اور بس میں گھبرائی تھی خنجر تجھ پہ چلتا دیکھ کر بس میں گھبرائی تھی خنجر تجھ پہ چلتا دیکھ کر پھر کسی مشکل میں گھر کر میں نہ گھبرائی حسین اور کون تھا جو مرنے والوں میں نہیں تھا خون بروں کون تھا جو مرنے والوں میں نہیں تھا خون بروں بھولنے بیٹھی تو کس کس کی نہ یاد آئی حسین آج بھی زینب کی آتی ہے صدا بھائی حسین اور دور افتادہ سفر سے لوٹ کر میں نے نوید دور افتادہ سفر سے لوٹ کر میں نے نوید ٹھنڈا پانی ہے ٹھنڈا پانی جب بھی آبس تیری یاد آئی حسین ٹھنڈا پانی جب پیا بس تیری یاد آئی حسین بھی زینب کی آتی ہے صدا بھائی حسین تیرا چہرہ تیری آنکھیں بھول کب پائی حسین آج بھی زینب کی آتی صدا بھائی حسین اللہم صل علی محمد وعلی محمد برائے تاجیل ظہور امام زمانہ بلندتر صلوات اللہم صل علی محمد وعلی محمد تیری زہرا پہ مصیبت کی گھڑی ہے ہائے بابا تیری زہرا پہ مصیبت کی گھڑی ہے کیسے دروازہ ہٹاؤں کیسے محسن کو بچاؤں سانس سینے میں رکی ہے تیری زہرا پہ مصیبت کی گھڑی ہے ہائے بابا تیری زہرا پہ مصیبت کی گھڑی ہے تیری امت نے بنا دی ہے یہ حالت بابا اور کوئی پسلی بھی نہیں میری سلامت بابا سانس لیتی ہوں میں جس دم رکنے لگتا ہے میرا دم صرف مرنے کی کمی ہے تیری زہرا پہ مصیبت کی گھڑی ہے ہائے بابا تیری زہرا پہ مصیبت کی گھڑی ہے کبھی دربار میں پیشی کو بلاتے ہیں ہمیں کبھی درواز پہ آ
سے بچے پوچھتے ہیں یہی مجھ سے کیا خطا ہم سے ہوئی ہے تیری زہرا پہ مصیبت کی گھڑی ہے ہائے بابا تیری زہرا پہ مصیبت کی گھڑی ہے شرم آتی ہے شرم آتی ہے بھلا تم کو بتاؤں کیسے اور یہ تماچوں کے نشان تم کو دکھاؤں کیسے تم نہ پہچان سکو گے دیکھ کر مجھ کو کہو گے کیا میری زہرا یہی ہے تیری زہرا پہ مصیبت کی گھڑی ہے ہائے بابا تیری زہرا پہ مصیبت کی گھڑی ہے محمد وآل محمد صلی اللہ علیہ وسلم
اللهم صل على محمد وعلى محمد.
I request you all to recite 5 times Amin Yujibu for all those who are sick and in need of our du'as. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim.
أما يجيب المضطر إذا دعاه ويكشف السوء أما يجيب المضطر إذا دعاه ويكشف السوء أما يجيب المضطر إذا دعاه ويكشف السوء أما يجيب المضطر إذا دعاه ويكشف السوء
رحم الله من قرأ سورة المباركة الفاتحة بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم أعوذ بالله من الشيطان اللعين الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله بارئ الخلائق الأجمعين باعث الأنبياء والمرسلين ثم الصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء حبيب قلوبنا وشفيع ذنوبنا أبي القاسم محمد اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وعجل فرجه ثم الصلاة والسلام على أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين المظلومين لا سيما ولي الله الحجة ابن الحسن صاحب الأمر والزمان اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وعجل فرجه روحي وأرواح العالمين له الفداء ولعنة الله على أعدائهم من الأولين والآخرين إلى قيام يوم الدين آمين رب العالمين. صلى الله عليك يا مولاي يا أبا عبد الله. صلى الله عليك يا مولاي يا أبا عبد الله. يا رحمة الله الواسعة وواب نجاة الأمة. يا غريب الغرباء يا مظلوم كربلاء. السلام على من جعل الله الشفاء في تربته. السلام على من الإجابة تحت قبته. السلام على ساكن كربلاء. فيا ليتنا ثم يا ليتنا وكنا معكم سادتي. يا سادتي فنفوز فوزا عظيما. نوروا مجالسكم بذكر محمد وآل محمد.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد.
أحبائي, when it comes to studying and understanding the life of the Holy Prophet, the biography of the Holy Prophet, the character of the Holy Prophet, sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wasallam, it becomes important for us to pay attention to the texts that we depend on in order to understand Rasulullah. Because your understanding of Rasulullah and your perception of Rasulullah, your attestation of a prophet will be dependent upon the perception and the understanding of the author that you rely on in order to understand Rasulullah. And hence it becomes absolutely important for us, number one, as Shia Ithna Ashari, and number two, as Muslims in general, to ensure that we pay attention to understanding Rasulullah through those channels that are infallible, as opposed to understanding Rasulullah through those channels that are fallible. And especially from fallible channels that do not fall back on or do not have a chain that emanates from an infallible. In other words, Ahibai, one of the most important mannerisms through which we are able to understand the Rasulullah, his quality, his character, his message, is through, number one, the Quran in itself and the hadith of Ahlul Bayt. For you find the manner in which Rasulullah and his mission is described through the Quran and through the hadith of Ahlul Bayt, there is a very stark contrast between what Quran and Itrah state in regards to Rasulullah and what others outside of the Itrah and Quran have stated about Rasulullah. To the extent that If a person was to sit and look at this by way of a muqarana, the Prophet, as described by the Orientalists, the Prophet described by the likes of Bukhari and Muslim, are in stark contrast with the Nabi described within the hadith of Ahlul Bayt in the Quran. And perhaps a person believes that the Prophet can be a zalim, and the Prophet can be prone to mistakes, the Prophet can be an oppressor, the Prophet can be a slave of his lust, depending on which author you go to. And hence, understanding the Nabi in the right manner is absolutely important. And the first marja, point of return for understanding the Prophet and the mission of the Prophet, is the Quran and the Ahlul Bayt. And if we understand this as a muqaddimah, if we understand this as an opening statement, inshallah, in honor of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sallam, I would like to explore with you certain elements of Rasulullah from the Quran and through the hadith of Ahlul Bayt. First and foremost, we begin with verse from the Holy Quran from Surah Al-Ma'idah, verse number 15 and verse number 16. And I will go through these very, very shortly. But hatman, 100% try and make an effort today, tomorrow, over the weekend to go through Surah Al-Ma'idah, particularly verse 15 and verse 16, to understand the mission of the Prophet. Ani, you and I, every salah that we recite 5 times a day, we say Ashhadu Anna in our tashahhud, Ashhadu Anna Muhammadan abduhu wa rasuluh. I bear witness that Rasulullah, Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sallam, Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad, you are the slave and the messenger of Allah. In every adhan on a daily basis, Ashhadu anna Muhammadan Rasulullah. In our kalima, Ashhadu anna Muhammadan Rasulullah. When a person is laid down into the grave as part of his talqeen, Ashhadu anna Muhammadan Rasulullah. Tayyib, if I bear witness that, Ya Rasulullah, that you are the Prophet of Allah, and the central axis of my faith, I need to understand, number one, first and foremost, what was the mission of the Holy Prophet? What was the Prophet sent for? When I say, Ashhadu anna Muhammadan Rasulullah, yani meaning Rasulullah, meaning what? Messenger of Allah, Prophet of Allah. What message did he come with? Who is there to explain to us the message of Rasulullah? The best channel to return back to is the Quran, because the one who appointed the Rasulullah is the best person from whom you can, or is the best entity from whom you can understand the message of Rasulullah. What was his mission? Mission of Rasulullah is outlined in Surah Al-Ma'idah in 4 points. Starting from verse number 15, look at the khitab. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Ya Ahl al-Kitab, kad ja'akum Rasuluna. The khitab is towards the Ahl al-Kitab. Ya Ahl al-Kitab. Ahl al-Kitab minhum. Ahl al-Kitab, yani the followers of Nabi Musa and the followers of Nabi Isa. So the khitab is towards them. Even though the verse of the Quran is addressing them, the message is for everyone. O you people of the book, yani the Jews and the Christians, kad ja'akum rasuluna. We have sent you our prophet. Who's the speaker? Allah Azza wa Jal. Now Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala goes ahead and outlines the mission of the prophet. What is his mission? يبين لكم كثيرا مما كنتم تخفون من الكتاب ويعفو عن كثير. I will pass through this real quick. Number one, mission of the Holy Prophet. Allah Azza wa Jal says, "O you Christians and Jews, followers of Nabi Isa and the followers of Nabi Musa, we have sent to you Rasulullah such that he may correct the distortions that have crept into your religions." The corruption that had filtered into Christianity, the corruption that had filtered in to Judaism as a result of the corrupt preachers, as a result of the corrupt scholars over time, because the Quran speaks about this in great detail, that it was the scholars of the past religions who corrupted the deen, and they made the deen into an organized institution of corruption where the name of Isa and the Musa would be used to manipulate the people. Became a control mechanism over the masses for their own dunyawi purposes. For part of Rasulullah's mission was to come and correct what was corrupted in the teachings of Nabi Isa and Nabi Musa. And hence from here you are able to understand the reality of the term when we say that Rasulullah is Khatamul Anbiya. Khatamul Anbiya, the seal of all prophets, meaning what? The message and the effort that Nabi Musa and Nabi Isa came to spread, that foundation Rasulullah number one has come to build on it. This message of Nabi Isa and Musa that was corrupted is now to be corrected and brought under the guide of Islam. This is one. And this becomes an important aspect even when it comes to understanding the relationship between global religions and the foundation for interfaith talk. It becomes the foundation of interfaith debates. Many times we have within our own schools and within our own circles where we say we can't debate with other faiths or with the followers of Nabi Isa and Nabi Musa using Rasulullah because they don't believe in him. This type of logic is against the logic of the Quran. Rasulullah was sent to correct and guide them. This is one. Number two, the verse goes on to say, قَدْ جَاءَكُم مِّنَ اللَّهِ نُورٌ وَكِتَابٌ مُبِينٌ. Allah Azza wa Jal describes Rasulullah as being a nur. And together with this nur, we have sent the book, yani the Quran. And then look at what the verse goes on to say. يَحْدِي بِهِ اللَّهُ مَنِ اتَّبَعَ رِضْوَانَهُ سُبُلُ السَّلَامِ or سُبُلَ السَّلَامِ. In a very brief translation, so we get to our point. It is through him that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala guides people towards what? This is the mission of Rasulullah. He guides people towards what? Subul as-salam. The message, the mission of the Holy Prophet. Number one, to correct the faiths of the past and bring them under the fold of Islam. Number two, Yahdi, to guide the people towards what? Subul as-salam, the path of peace and prosperity. Mission of Rasulullah was to guide people towards peace and prosperity, both in the dunya as well as the akhirah. For the question comes that, how did Rasulullah guide people towards peace and prosperity, this salam? He guided the people towards this peace, towards this prosperity, Number one, fundamentally through his akhlaq. The people fell in love with the Prophet through his akhlaq. He guided them towards peace and tranquility and prosperity through akhlaq. In fact, through his akhlaq, he became a source of mercy for mankind. وَمَا أَرْسَلْنَاكَ إِلَّا رَحْمَةً لِلْعَالَمِينَ. We did not send you except as a mercy towards mankind. For this akhlaq of Rasulullah is a manifestation of the mercy of Allah, and this mercy guides you towards salam, towards peace and tranquility. Rahmah, towards salam. And you find this evident in the character of Rasulullah. Rahmah, that a person falls in love with. Rahmah, mercy, and peace and tranquility are characters that the human being naturally falls in love with. And this is what Rasulullah did. Conquered the hearts of the people. Before Risala, the announcement of Risala, the Holy Prophet was known as Sadiq and Amin, the truthful and the trustworthy, to the extent that trustworthy, the enemies of Rasulullah, who would throw stones at him while he preached the message of Nabuwah. Do you know, within the books of the Seerah, it is mentioned that when Rasulullah began to propagate the message of Tawheed at a public level, alaniyatan, because he began the tabligh of Risala in stages. Number one, he was commanded to keep it secret. Number two, wandur ashiratak, that guide your ashira from the close people. And then after that, Risala Am. With the Risala Am, when the public, when the order came from Allah that Rasulullah should publicly preach the message of Tawheed, Rasulullah went on the mountain of Safa. How we have Safa and Marwa, which these Nawasib have destroyed most of what remains from these mountains of Safa and Marwa. The Prophet stood on the mountain of Safa and called people towards Tawheed. The books of Seerah state that they pelted Rasulullah with stones to the extent that he was bleeding from his forehead all the way to his feet. And know how painful it is to be hit with a pebble. Leave aside a stone. A pebble hits you by mistake, it hurts. Imagine people with all their energy and effort throwing stones on Rasulullah. They would throw stones on Rasulullah in the daytime. At night, they would come to the house of Rasulullah. They would say, "This is our amana. Will you safeguard it for us?" The Prophet would safeguard the trust of the same people who in the daytime would be an enemy to him. Where have you seen this in the dunya? In the history of mankind, where have you seen this? That you have a person like Rasulullah who safeguards the trust of his enemies. We live at a time where sometimes a friend cannot trust another friend for trust and wealth. A believer cannot trust another believer. Rasulullah came and conquered the hearts, and the kuffar and the juhala of the Quraysh knew what Rasulullah is saying, the truth. They knew he was truthful in his claim. They bore enmity towards him. They swore to kill him, but they also knew inside, he will not deceive us of our trust. Qualities that are rare in the community at that time and in this time. Rasulullah rose with these qualities to win the hearts of the people, because trustworthiness is needed in order for a community of peace and tranquility to exist. Rasulullah's message of guiding people towards peace, a message that was underlined with mercy. And you look at the entire Risalah of Rasulullah was mercy. His character was mercy. Hadith al-Sharif states that Rasulullah once was reciting Salatul Jama'ah in Masjidul Nabawi in Medina. He's reciting Salatul Jama'ah. Salat, which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu aqimus salat. O you who believe, uphold the prayer. Hadith al-Sharif says, As-salat amududdin. Salat is the pillar of religion. Hadith says, Salat in kubilat is salat kubila ma siwaha wa in ruddat ma siwaha. If salat is accepted, everything is accepted. If salat is rejected, everything is rejected. No other action is accepted. How important is salat? This salat, imagine this salat behind Rasulullah. Sirah mentions when the Rasulullah was in Salat al-Jama'ah. The men were praying behind him, the women were praying behind him. In his Salat, Rasulullah hears an infant crying. Baby. The mother had come for Salat al-Jama'ah. And she came with her child. So she kept the child on the side. And as they were in Salatul Jama'ah, the child started crying. Rasulullah hears the crying of the child. Rasulullah, the seerah mentions, Rasulullah sped through the Salat, recited the Salat in the fastest manner possible, shortened the dhikr in the ruku, shortened the dhikr in the sajda, shortened the surah that he recited. And he completed the prayer. Sahaba went to him. They said, Ya RasoolAllah, this is salat. You are worshipping Allah and you shorten the salat today. Look at the mercy of Rasulullah. He says, I heard the child cry. So I understood if the child is crying, the mother will be anxious for her child. So I shortened the salat. Rahmah. Rasulullah was an embodiment of mercy. Mercy not only towards human beings, mercy towards the animals. Sirah again mentions Masjidul Nabawi. Rasulullah was sitting in Masjidul Nabawi. And as he was seated, his Abbas was spread on the sand because Masjidul Nabawi had sand at that time. And as he was talking with the companions, a stray cat from the cats of the city of Medina came and sat on his Abbas. And it slept. The conversation of Rasulullah with the Sahaba ended. Rasulullah went to stand up. He sees the cat is asleep on his Abbas. وَمَا أَرْسَلْنَاكَ إِلَّا رَحْمَةً لِلْعَالَمِينَ. Rahmah of Rasulullah. Sirah says he cut his own Abbas around where the cat was sleeping, so that standing up, he would not disturb the cat. And he walked away. Rasulullah's mercy towards animals is like this. Just get how delicate, soft, pure, and tender the heart of Rasulullah was. Mercy of Rasulullah, in essence, a reflection of his mercy was his humility, his humbleness, such that the Sirah mentions when the Rasulullah would sit with his companions inside of Masjidul Nabawi, Rasulullah never commanded for a throne to be set for him. He never sat in a manner where a person would perceive arrogance and authority. Rather, Rasulullah would sit with the people on the ground. And when he sat with them on the ground, he would ensure that they sat in a circle, such that if anyone else came to the mosque, it is perceived that as a circle, people are equal. Rasulullah never imposed authority over the people. This is a lesson for leadership in Islam, leadership in a community. He would sit with them in a circle. And Rasulullah, when they spoke, he would listen and never interrupt. And when he sat in a circle with the people, as he would speak with them and listen to them, the seerah says, even the eye contact that Rasulullah made with everyone in the seating was of equal time. So imagine that Rasulullah is sitting with 20 people and he sat for 20 minutes with them. He would have looked at each person and made eye contact with each person for a minute. Not that this one gets more attention than that one, or that one gets more attention than him. The companions would go home and they would all say to their wives, it is as if we had one-on-one audience with Rasulullah. The smile of Rasulullah was a smile that people would fall in love with. And this rahmah of Rasulullah, in essence, look at how we started. The message is a message of salam, peace and tranquility. In order to achieve peace and tranquility, Rasulullah demonstrated rahmah. And this rahmah is a reflection of his jamal. Jamal yani beauty. So look at the relationship between jamal, rahmah, and salam. And from the jamal of Rasulullah, the beauty of Rasulullah, the beauty of his characteristics is one thing, but the beauty of his appearance was something else. The seerah says that he had long black hair that would fall towards the lower part of his earlobe, and hair that would come over his ears. Black, dark hair that was neither curly nor straight, yani hair that was wavy. And when his hair grew, he would comb his hair in a manner that he would part it from the sides, and the hair would fall over his face. And his face was as radiant as a full moon. His forehead was broad, and he had eyebrows that were thin, that would arch around his eyes like a bow. And when he would smile, the whiteness of his teeth would dazzle. The eyes of Rasulullah were sharply planted, such that if a person ever gazed into the eyes of Rasulullah, they would be able to sense the nobility of the Prophet through his eyes, and they would feel the aura or the haiba of Nabuwah through his glance. When you look at a person in the eyes sometimes, from the eyes, there is an art. You can sense the evil of people through their eyes. You can sense the softness and the gentleness of a person through their eyes. You are able to understand the nobility of a person through their eyes. These are characters of Rasulullah that if you and I read, we fall in love with the Prophet. And when you read this, the first thing, one of the first things that come to your mind, Sayyidina wa Maulana Imam Ali al-Akbar. Because Imam al-Hussein said in regards to Ali al-Akbar, when he went into the Maidan, he said to the people, to Umar ibn Sa'd and the likes, قَدْ بَرَزَ إِلَيْكُمْ غُلَامٌ أَشْبَهُ النَّاسِ خُلْقًا وَخَلْقًا بِرَسُولِ اللَّهِ. there has come upon you a youth who resembles Rasulullah the most in his character, in his speech, and in his looks. Yani Rasulullah or Aliyun al-Akbar, duplicate of Rasulullah. With this Rasulullah Jamal, this Jamal has Rahmah, and this Rahmah leads towards Salam. This is number 2. Number 3, the mission of Rasulullah. وَيُخْرِجُهُمْ مِنَ الظُّلُمَاتِ إِلَى النُّورِ. The mission of Rasulullah to remove people from the darkness of ignorance into the light of guidance. How? The darkness of ignorance into the nur of guidance, yani through deen. Rasulullah, through the deen of Islam, gave the human being the opportunity to come out from the slavery of this dunya, from being a slave of the materialistic world, from being a slave of desires, from being a slave of oppression. He took them out of this slavery and brought them into the realm of liberation through servitude to Allah Azza wa Jal. And if you look at this entire deen of ours, Furu'ud-Din, Usuluddin is nothing but liberation. Our deen, even in terms of ahkam, is nothing but liberation. Anything within our deen which is haram because prohibition of that deed by you not engaging in it actually liberates you from its slavery. Haram, refraining from haram, is not abstinence, it's not a restriction, it's actually a liberation. When Islam prohibits you, when Rasulullah prohibits you from consuming alcohol, he didn't restrain you or restrict you or forbid you from anything. He liberated you. He liberated you from the vices of alcohol, from the slavery that is accompanied with the consumption of alcohol. He liberated you from the disgrace and the lack of dignity that is accompanied with the consumption of alcohol. For hurma in Islam, in terms of tahrim, making something haram is not a restriction, is liberation. This is what Rasulullah did. Liberated the people from slavery, of their desires and of this materialistic dunya. Number 4, and this, Ahibba, is by way of index. If you research this more and more and more, you will find missions and the message of Rasulullah that it has depth. The last part over here that is mentioned within the verse, وَيَهْدِيهِمْ إِلَى صِرَاطٍ مُسْتَقِيمٍ. So the mission of Rasulullah, number 1, to correct and guide the people of the book, the previous religions. Number 2, يَهْدِيهِمْ إِلَى سُبُلَ السَّلَامِ, to guide people towards an environment of peace and tranquility. Number 3, to remove them from the darkness of ignorance and into the light of guidance. Number 4, the Quran says, وَيَهْدِيهِمْ إِلَى صِرَاطٍ مُسْتَقِيمٍ. The task of the Holy Prophet, the mission of the Holy Prophet, one of the 4 pillars of Risala for Rasulullah was to guide people towards Siratul Mustaqim. If you were to look back to all the hadith And the words of the Mufassirin, when it comes to the Quran, Siratul Mustaqim is none other than the path of Maulana Amir al-Mu'mineen, Ali ibn Abi Talib alayhi salam. Yani, and we have spoken about this in previous lectures with references that Sirat al-Mustaqim, according to the Mukhalifin, is Amir al-Mu'mineen. So Allah Azza wa Jal states in the Quran that from the 4 pillars of Risala, one of those pillars is Rasulullah's function to call and invite and guide people towards the wilayah of Amir al-Mu'mineen. So you think about this, because see, the Quran doesn't have empty slogans. Quran is a book of guidance. So I thought about this. If one of the 4 cornerstones of Risala, that Allah says, Ya Rasulullah, your job is to call people towards the wilayah of Amir al-Mu'mineen, as per this verse, Surah Al-Ma'idah, verse 15 and 16. A very basic thinking, and this is the shallowest, and it's the minimum. We have at least, on minimum, 1,000 verses that are agreed upon by the Amma and the Khassa. 1,000 verses of the Quran that were revealed by Allah Azza wa Jal in honor of Amir al-Mu'mineen. Yani 1,000 verses minimum is agreed upon by the Khasa and the Amma that these verses are revealed in honor of Amir al-Mu'mineen. 1,000 verses of the Quran. Quran was revealed over a period of how many years? 23 years. 10 years Rasulullah was in Makkah, 13 years, or 13 years after Rasulullah was in Makkah and 10 years in Medina. 23 years. Over a period of 23 years, the Quran was revealed. Sahih Allah, 23 years. 1,000 verses of the Quran were revealed in honor of Amir al-Mu'mineen. If we do math, 1,000 divided by 23, give or take, it comes to about 40. That means every year, for 23 years, every year 40 verses were revealed by Allah in honor of Amir al-Mu'mineen. 40 verses a year. If you say 40 verses a year, give or take, 4 times a month, Rasulullah is telling the people, oh people, Allah has said this about Ali. Allah has said this about Ali. 4 times a month. That means if you divide it even further, every week, once Rasulullah would say, people, this is about Ali. No! Hey, Ali! Every week for 23 years of Risala, Rasulullah said to the people, Ali, Ali, Ali. This is the meaning of this verse, وَيَعْدِيهِمْ إِلَىٰ صِرَاطٍ مُسْتَقِيمٍ. Every week for 23 years, Rasulullah guided the people towards the wilayah of Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam. How did the Ummah respond to Rasulullah? This is the tragedy. The Ummah with a prophet who was so merciful, with a prophet who was so gentle, with a prophet who was so lovable, his own companions oppressed him the most and abandoned the religion after it. You know, sometimes people say, how could you speak bad about the Sahaba? How could it be that people who looked at Rasulullah, who prayed with Rasulullah, who heard Rasulullah get revelation from Jibreel, how could these people be wrong? How could these people oppress Rasulullah? So people who prayed behind the Prophet, how can they be bad people? The reality is the Quran mentions this reality. If you refer back to Surah Ali Imran, verse number 144. Look at what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says. And this verse was revealed after the battle of Uhud. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. وَمَا مُحَمَّدٌ إِلَّا رَسُولُ اللَّهِ. The Prophet or Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sallam, Allah is not but a prophet. He's a prophet. قَدْ خَلَتْ مِنْ قَبْلِهِ الرُّسُلُ. And there were many prophets before him who came and went. This is the point. أَفَإِنْ مَاتَ أَوْ قُتِلَ. If the prophet was to die, rather, because the translation of the word or the meaning of the word aw over here is not or, it's rather. And we've got previous majalis that explain this from a linguistic perspective with proof. أَفَإِنْ مَاتَ أَوْ قُتِلَ. If the prophet was to die, rather if the prophet was to be killed. Look at what the Quran does. Quran even gives you an understanding that the prophet didn't die a natural death. The prophet was killed. But the Quran goes on to say, أَفَإِنْ مَاتَ أَوْ قُتِلَ. If the prophet was to die, rather if he was to be killed. Ya Ummah, Ya Ummatul Muslimin, O Sahaba, what will you do if the prophet was to be killed? In kalabtum ala a'qabikum. You abandon the religion. Quran is saying, those who are Sahaba, if the prophet was to die, excuse me, rather if the prophet was to be killed, the people, the Sahaba would abandon the religion. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. اللهم صل على محمد.
They would abandon the Holy Prophet. The Sahaba themselves, the Quran attests this. And the Prophet faced dissent. The Prophet faced dissent and disrespect by his own companions even before his death. On his deathbed, they disrespected him. If you were to refer back to both Sahih Bukhari and to Sahih Muslim, look at the state of affairs. This prophet who was an embodiment of Rahmah and Jamal, how did his companions treat him on his deathbed? Shufu Hadith al-Sharif is narrated by Bukhari on authority of Ibn Abbas. This is found in Sahih Bukhari. لما اشتد بالنبي وجعه قال ائتوني بكتاب أكتب لكم كتابا لا تضلوا بعده. When the pain of the Holy Prophet from his final sickness, what that sickness was, we will come to. When the pain of the Holy Prophet increased from his final sickness, he called on the people and said, bring me a pen and paper so I can write for you a final piece of guidance. If you follow it, you will never go astray. You get how important is this final decree of the Prophet? If it was any other religion, the final words of the Prophet, do you know what they would do? They would write it and they would frame it and they would post it for everybody. You and I do this. You and I do this. May Allah give all of your parents and grandparents a long life if they are alive. And to those of our parents who have passed away, may Allah give them rahmah. You see, if a parent is about to pass away, parent is in the final stages, mother, father. What is one of the first things the children do? They will try and capture every memory of the dying parent. Take pictures together. If the mother said anything, the father said anything, they'll record the voice note. When the parent has passed away, we said these are the last memories of our parent, of our grandparent. Sahih. The Prophet gave his ummah a chance for that final memory. Let me give you this decree which will protect you from misguidance and Jahannam forever. Not only you, for the generations to come. The Prophet is supposed to be more beloved to us than our mothers and our fathers. Imagine a person, his mother or his father. Imagine a person's father is dying. And the dying father says to his son, son, come. Record my voice or let me write something you will remember me for this. And the son refuses to his father. What would you say about this type of a son? What would you say? Look at what they did to Rasulullah. Rasulullah said, give me a pen and paper. I write for you this divine decree. This is hadith in Bukhari. قال عمر بن الخطاب إن النبي غلبه الوجع. The Prophet has been overcome with pain. Doesn't know what he's talking about. Do you know when a person is overcome with pain, you start speaking things that don't make sense. You don't know what you're speaking about. And these are words that are polite. If you go back to the books of hadith, there are words that are even more vulgar. It is recorded that he said, Inna rajul la yahjur. The man has become delirious. Not even they said the man has become delirious. Look at what Bukhari says. قال عمر بن الخطاب إن النبي غلبه الوجع. Prophets overcome with pain. He doesn't know what he is saying. وَإِنَّنَا كِتَابُ اللَّهِ حَسْبُنَا كِتَابَ اللَّهِ. So we have the Quran. Guidance. What words of guidance is going to give us? We have the Quran. The Quran is enough for us. Be very careful, Shabab. Even when we navigate through Islamic studies and you give a person a hadith, he tells you, I don't believe in hadith, show me from Quran. Especially our Shia youth. Be very careful. This is the mentality of Umar ibn Khattab. Hasbuna kitab Allah. Everything they want to show us from the Quran. We don't believe in hadith. This is the mentality of Umar. He said, Hasbuna kitab Allah. This deen was not built on the Quran. It was built on the Quran and the Itra. Quran and Ahlul Bayt. This is Sahih Bukhari. Look at what Sahih Muslim says. Again, on authority of Ibn Abbas. أنه قال يوم الخميس وما يوم الخميس. They even recorded in history it was the day of Thursday. The Thursday before Rasulullah passed away. Rasulullah passed away on a Saturday. This event happened on a Thursday, only 2 days before he passed away. قال رسول الله ائتوني بالكتف والدوات أكتب لكم كتابا لن تذلوا بعده أبدا. Rasulullah said, give me paper and ink so I may write for you a decree, words of guidance. You shall never go astray after that. Look at what Muslim says. This is Sahih Muslim. Before this we narrated, we quoted who? Sahih Bukhari. Look at what Sahih Muslim says. So the Prophet has called for paper and pen so that he can give us guidance. Look at what Muslim says. فَقَالُوا إِنَّ رَسُولَ اللَّهِ يَحْجُرُ. They said, yani the people who were around Rasulullah said, indeed, the man or Rasulullah, they said, the people said, the man has become delirious. Muslim, Sahih Muslim, doesn't take the name of Umar ibn Khattab. He said, they said. They realized how shameful the deed was as per Bukhari. So to hide the perpetrator of this crime, they cancelled his name and they said, they said. This is the reality of what happened to Rasulullah. More than that, this open dissent and this open disrespect, this open kufr. Shabab, do you remember a few years back when a Danish newspaper drew cartoons of Rasulullah? What happened? The entire Muslim world went crazy. They said they have insulted our prophet. So they stood up in protests and they burned cars and they destroyed buildings and they vandalized and they said boycott. Sahih? Do you remember the news? Abbas drew a cartoon of Rasulullah and they all said kufr and insult and demonstrations and boycott the Danish. What about Abbas who insulted the Prophet on his deathbed? What should our reaction towards him be? What he said is 1,000,000 times worse than what that Danish newspaper may have done. In fact, when the Danish newspaper drew the cartoon insulting the Holy Prophet, it became an opportunity for Muslims. I'm not saying it's correct, but it became an opportunity for Muslims to write millions of books and pamphlets and distribute them about Rasulullah. Because the common person started now thinking, who is this caricature that they're making fun of? But this, how do you repair this insult that was done to us? 2 days before his death, I'm Madhlumiyya of Rasulullah. And more than that, how did the Prophet die? You know, there was a person I had met. His parents, his father was killed during the time of Saddam in the 80s or in the 90s. For over 20 years, they couldn't find out how he was killed. They said, the children said, the very minimal, we want an autopsy. Baba, autopsy. We want to know who's responsible for killing him. Was he actually killed by Saddam? Did he die in a car accident? Did he die out of thirst? What did they do? We want an autopsy. We want the truth. They felt oppressed because they did not have access to the truth of how their beloved one died. Muslim Ummah is like this. Rasulullah is oppressed because till today the Muslim Ummah does not know the reality of how he was killed, how he died. Was it a natural death? Was it an assassination that happened? And these are important aspects of Risalah that you and I need to understand in order for this deen to come out from the tragedy which it is suffering today. شوفوا حديث الشريف. صلوا على محمد وآل محمد.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد.
Hadith al-Sharif is narrated on authority of Imam Ja'far ibn Muhammad as-Sadiq salawatullahi wa salamuhu alayhi. He says, Inna al-Hasan alayhi salam qala li ahli bayti. Imam Hassan al-Mujtaba, Imam al-Sadiq is narrating from his great uncle. He says, Imam Hassan al-Mujtaba said, Inni amutu bis-sum kama mata RasoolAllah. Imam Hassan al-Mujtaba said, I will be martyred through poisoning. I will be poisoned to death, just like my grandfather Rasulullah. Who poisoned Imam Hassan al-Mujtaba? His wife Ju'ada. What does Imam Hassan say? I am poisoned by my wife, like the way my grandfather was poisoned by his wife. Shuf Hadith al-Sharif, narrated by Al-Ayyashi, again on authority of our sixth Imam. He was asked, or he said, Tadrun mata nabi aw qutil. Do you know, did the Prophet die a natural death or was he killed? This is a reference to Surah Ali Imran, verse 144. Afa in mata aw qutil. Imam Sadiq gives the tafsir of this adawat aw. He says, Inna Allah yaqul afa in mata aw qutil. The Prophet says, or Imam Sadiq says, Fasumma qabla al-maut. He was poisoned to death. Innahuma sakata. Them two ladies, two evil wives of the Prophet, poisoned him. And the reality is that it is very difficult to hide history, especially for the one who is an intellect. Because much as the Mukhalifin tried to hide this reality, it becomes very apparent. Shufu Hadith al-Sharif, again by Bukhari. قالت Aisha. Aisha says, لددناه في مرضه. We forced fed him during his sickness. Ladadna, lad is when you force somebody to ingest something. Shufu ahbai. I don't know if you will be able to handle this mental image or picture or not. This is Rasulullah in his sickness, in his weakness, because the fever was such that it was burning his body. One of the companions said, I went to kiss Rasulullah's hand. When I touched his hand, I removed my hand because I could not bear the heat. And the Rasulullah was in a state of weakness. So when they say ladadna, to force feed somebody when they are weak, they can't move, they can't react, they can't protect themselves. Do you know how you force feed? They say you hold the mouth and the limbs and you force what you want inside. They did this to Rasulullah. Ladadnahu fi maradih. We forced something into his mouth. What was the reaction of Rasulullah? Hadith says, فَجَعَلَ يُشِيرُ إِلَيْنَا أَلَّا تَلُدُّونِ. Rasulullah was pointing to them with his fingers. He was saying to them, no, don't feed me. Look at the justification of this evil wife. فقلنا كراهية المريض للدواء. This is how the sick people act when they don't want to take medicine. Rasulullah وَمَا يَنْتِقُ عَنِ الْهَوَىٰ إِنْ هُوَ إِلَّا وَحْيٌ يُوحَىٰ. Prophet does not speak except out of revelation. So don't feed me, don't poison me. They forced it through. And they said their justification. This is medication that nobody likes to take. Why do you know what is Gharib, the Madlumiyat of Rasulullah? The one who speaks about the reality of Rasulullah's oppression, he becomes oppressed. The person who speaks about the ghurba of Rasulullah, he becomes oppressed. The person who speaks the truth about how the Prophet was martyred, the one who speaks the truth, he becomes oppressed. How madlum is Rasulullah? The historians mention and the hadith mention, Ya Shiat Ali Mohamed, I want to take you tonight to Medina al-Munawwara. And it is as if you were seated on the side of the door of Rasulullah's house and you were watching the narrations, you're watching the events fold in front of you. The narrations mention that as the effect of the poisons began to overtake the body of the Holy Prophet, the Prophet would faint and would gain consciousness a number of times. Between the fainting and the gaining of consciousness, he brought Amir al-Mu'minin by his side and he gave him the final wasiyah. Rasulullah said to him, "O my brother, O Ali, after me you shall be faced with oppression and you shall be faced with dhulm by the people of Quraysh. They shall oppose you, Ya Ali, and they shall oppose you, Ya Ali, and they shall oppress you, Ya Ali. For the command from the Lord is that, Ya Ali, you are to me like the way Harun was to Musa. So if you find the supporters, Ya Ali, then fight and take your right. And if you find yourself abandoned and you have no supporters, then your obligation, Ya Ali, is to remain patient in the same way that Harun was patient when the people abandoned him and decided to worship the golden calf." Allah, Allah. Amir al-Mu'minin replied and said, "You shall find me to be patient upon your command, Ya RasoolAllah." And then Amir al-Mu'minin called for Amir, and then Rasulullah called for Amir again. Amir al-Mu'minin came, he put his ear by the mouth of Rasulullah. Sayyidah Zahra says, Rasulullah whispered into the ears of Amir al-Mu'mineen for quite a long time. Amir al-Mu'mineen says, "This is the final moments in which Rasulullah taught me 1,000 doors of knowledge. From this 1,000 doors, another 1,000 open up." As he did this, he then called for Sayyidah Fatima al-Zahra and he called for Imam Hassan and Hussein. Both Imam Hassan and Hussein, they threw themselves on the chest of Rasulullah. They began to weep and cry. Amir al-Mu'mineen said, "Ya Rasulullah, shall I make the children sit on the side?" Rasulullah says, "O Ali, let me smell the fragrance of these two children while I'm alive in the dunya. For this is my grandson who will be poisoned, and this is my grandson who shall be shaheed in the land of Karbala. Let me seek comfort from their fragrance while I am in the dunya." Imam Hassan and Hussein crying on the chest of their grandfather, Rasulullah. Allah, Allah. Ya Shiat Amir al-Mu'mineen. And then Sayyidah Fatima al-Zahra, she put her forehead on the forehead of Rasulullah. She began to weep and cry. When Rasulullah looked at her, Rasulullah also began to weep. He says, "Oh my daughter Fatima, why do you weep?" She says, "Oh Rasulullah, I fear for what will happen after you to us and to our family." Rasulullah then said, "Oh Fatima, you are the Sayyidati Nisa'il Alameen. You are the master of the women of Jannah. And your two sons, Hassan and Hussein, Sayyidi Shababi Ahlil Jannah. And your husband Ali, he is the one who shall quench the thirst of the people in the pond of Kawthar. From your son Hussein shall be the 9 Imams, the last of them who shall be the awaited Mahdi." And then Rasulullah fainted, he lost consciousness, so they all began to cry around him. When Rasulullah gained consciousness, he called for Fatima and he called for Amir al-Mu'mineen, "Allah, Allah, Ya Shia." The Maktal mentions, the narrations mention, Rasulullah, he took the hand of Sayyidah Fatima al-Zahra, and then he took the hand of Amir al-Mu'mineen. Rasulullah then began to weep and cry, and on his chest he put the hand of Fatima, and on top of it he put the hand of Amir al-Mu'mineen. He then looked at Amir al-Mu'mineen and said, "Ya Ali, this is the hand of my daughter Fatima. I leave her as a trust underneath you. Ya Ali, this is the trust of Allah that I leave in your care. Allah, Allah, Ya Shia." Which is why when Amir al-Mu'mineen buried Sayyidah Fatima al-Zahra, he stood at the qabr of Sayyidah Fatima, and then he looked towards Masjid al-Nabawi, and he said, "Ya Rasulallah, this amana which you left in my hand, I am returning this amana back to you. But Ya Rasulallah, you ask her how this amana was treated. Ya Rasulallah, when this amana comes to you with a broken rib, ask her who crushed her between the legs. Ya Rasulallah, when this amana comes to you with a swollen face, ask her who slapped her. Ya Rasulallah, when this amana comes to you with a bruised eye, you ask her who whipped her across the face. Allah, Allah. The narrations mentioned that Amir al-Mu'mineen and Sayyidah Zahra both began to weep. Sayyidah Zahra gives permission for Malakul Maut to enter into the room. He enters in, and the fragrance of cold wind entered into the room. The narrations mention Malakul Maut sat in front of Rasulullah like a slave who is at his command. Ya Shi'at al-Muhammad. These are the final moments of Rasulullah. Malakul Maut sat in front of him with humbleness. Jibreel descended down from the heavens. Rasulullah said, "Oh my brother Ali, these are my final moments in the dunya, and I want for my ruh to come out of my body while my head is on your lap." So the narrations mention Rasulullah lay down facing the Qibla. He straightened his hands, he straightened his legs, he put his head on the lap of Amir al-Mu'mineen. Jibreel then said, "Ya Rasulullah, do you give permission for Malakul Maut to begin to remove your ruh?" Rasulullah said, "Yes." Malakul Maut began to remove the ruh of Rasulullah. Amir al-Mu'mineen says, "The head of Rasulullah was on my lap, and I held up his chin with my right hand. When Malakul Maut removed the ruh of Rasulullah, it ascended towards the heavens. As a breeze passed, Amir al-Mu'mineen wiped it with his hand on his face. Wa Muhammadan wa Rasulallah. Rasulullah stopped breathing while his head was on the lap of Amir al-Mu'mineen. Sayyidah Fatima al-Zahra began to weep and to cry. Ya Abata, Ya Rasulallah. Allah, Allah. Ya Shiat Ali Muhammad, this is for you the last line of Masa'ib for the Zawar of Imam al-Hussein. Where are the Zawar of Abu Abdullah? You were in Karbala just a few days ago. And when you were in Karbala, did you see what is written on the doors of the Haram? On the doors of the Haram in Karbala, it is written, Rasulullah said, Rasulullah said, Kala Rasulullah, Husseinu minni wa ana min al-Hussein. Rasulullah said, Hussein is from me and I am from Hussein. And say, Ya Rasulullah, on your dying moments, your head was on the lap of Amir al-Mu'mineen. But this Hussein who is from you, in the final moments, Ya Rasulullah, where was the head of Imam al-Hussein? He lay on the plains of Karbala. His head and cheek was covered in dust. Shuman al-Lain was kicking him on the chest. Ya Rasulullah, Zainab was shouting from Tilla Zainabiyya. Zainab was crying out, Ya Adu Allah. ماتم الحسين ماتم رسول الله